The shot rang out across the empty plains like a thunderclap, sending a flock of startled crows into the crimson sunset sky as Penelope Michaels ran for her life. Her breath came in desperate gasps, the hem of her once fine dress now torn and caked with the red dust of Idaho Territory. 1882. Behind her, hoofbeats grew louder. Her pursuers weren't giving up. They'd follow her all the way to Shoshone City if they had to, determined to silence the only witness to their heinous crime. Penelope had never imagined her life would come to this when she'd arrived from Boston 3 months earlier. The respectable position as a schoolteacher in the growing railroad town had seemed like the fresh start she needed after losing her parents. But that was before she'd seen what she wasn't supposed to see, before she'd witnessed the bank president and the sheriff's deputy exchanging money with the notorious Blackwell gang after the stagecoach robbery that had left 3 people dead. She stumbled on a stone, her ankle twisting painfully as she fell forward. The sound of horses grew louder. Penelope scrambled behind a large boulder, pressing her back against the cool surface as tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face. Night was falling fast, and with it her chances of reaching town before they caught her. The hoofbeats slowed, and she heard men's voices, low and threatening. She couldn't have gotten far, one said. Find her. Mr. Lancaster wants this dealt with tonight. What if she's already reached town? Another asked. Then we'll say she's delusional. Who's going to believe a hysterical woman over the bank president and the deputy? Penelope's heart sank. They were right. She was new to town, an outsider with no family, no connections. The bank president, Howard Lancaster, was one of the most respected men in the territory. Deputy Roy Sims had been born and raised in Shoshone City. Her word against theirs would be meaningless. As the men spread out to search, Penelope slipped from her hiding place and limped toward a cluster of trees. If she could make it to the creek that ran parallel to the main road, she might be able to follow it to safety. But her injured ankle slowed her considerably, and exhaustion was making her dizzy. The snap of a twig nearby froze her in place. A large silhouette emerged from the gathering darkness, a man on horseback. Penelope's heart lurched, but she had nowhere to run. She pressed herself against a tree trunk, praying the shadows would conceal her. The rider drew closer, and in the fading light she could make out a broad-shouldered figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Not one of her pursuers. They hadn't been dressed like cowboys. This stranger represented either salvation or another threat. She had no way of knowing which. Desperation won out over caution. She stepped forward, waving her hands. "Please," she whispered urgently. "Help me." The horse stopped abruptly. The rider's hand moved to his holster, but he didn't draw his gun. "Who's there?" His voice was deep, wary. "I'm being pursued," Penelope said, her voice breaking. "They're trying to kill me." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his horse between them as if unsure whether she posed a threat. When he stepped around his mount, Penelope could finally see his face in the last light of day, strong jawline, keen eyes, and an expression that revealed neither trust nor dismissal. "Why would anyone be trying to kill a lady like yourself?" he asked, his tone measured. Before Penelope could answer, voices called out from the direction she'd fled. The stranger's posture changed instantly. He moved toward her, closing the distance between them with silent, purposeful strides. "Get on the horse," he said, his voice low and commanding. Penelope hesitated. "Now, madam, I don't know what trouble you're in, but those don't sound like men with friendly intentions." With his help, Penelope mounted the horse, wincing as pain shot through her ankle. The stranger swung up behind her, one arm securing her as he turned the horse away from the voices and urged it into a swift trot. They rode in silence for nearly 20 minutes, the stranger guiding his horse with confidence even as the last light faded from the sky. Finally, they came to a small cabin nestled in a stand of pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. "My ranch hand's wife will see to your ankle," the cowboy said as he dismounted and helped her down. "You'll be safe here for the night." Inside the cabin, a middle-aged woman named Martha fussed over Penelope, cleaning and wrapping her ankle while the cowboy stood by the door, occasionally glancing out the window. When Martha left to prepare some food, he finally turned his full attention to Penelope. "Name's Victor Adler," he said, removing his hat. "I run the Triple Ranch about 5 miles north of here." "Penelope Michaels," she replied. "I'm the schoolteacher in Shoshone City." Victor nodded. "I've heard they hired someone new. Haven't been to town much lately. Calving season keeps me busy." He studied her for a moment. "Now, would you mind telling me why the schoolteacher is running for her life in the middle of nowhere?" The tears Penelope had been holding back suddenly spilled over. "I saw something I shouldn't have," she said, her voice trembling. "The bank president, Mr. Lancaster, and Deputy Sims meeting with the Blackwell gang. They were dividing money from the stagecoach robbery last week. 3 people died in that robbery, Mr. Adler." Victor's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Michaels." "I know what I saw," she insisted, wiping at her tears. "But they saw me too. I've been hiding, trying to figure out what to do. Today they found where I was staying, a room at the widow Parker's house. I barely escaped." She looked up at him, despair evident in her eyes. "I've tried telling people, but no one believes me. Lancaster is too powerful, too respected. They think I'm either lying or confused or—" She trailed off, unable to continue through her tears. Victor watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled up a chair and sat across from her, leaning forward with his forearms resting on his knees. "I believe every word," he said quietly. Penelope's head snapped up, her tearful eyes wide with surprise. "You do?" Victor nodded slowly. "Lancaster's been buying up land all over the territory, more than he should be able to afford on a small-town banker's earnings. And there's been talk about Sims looking the other way for certain crimes." He paused. "But seeing them with the Blackwell gang, that's the piece that's been missing." Relief washed over Penelope, so profound she felt lightheaded. Someone believed her. For the first time since witnessing the meeting, she felt a flicker of hope. "What do we do?" she asked. Victor's expression turned grim. "First, we keep you alive, then we gather evidence." "Your word alone won't be enough, not against men like Lancaster and Sims. We need proof." "But how? They'll be watching for me in town." "I know people," Victor said. "People who aren't fond of Lancaster or his methods, and I know this territory better than most. We'll figure something out." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "For now, you rest that ankle. Martha will take good care of you. I need to make sure we weren't followed." As he turned to leave, Penelope reached out and caught his sleeve. "Mr. Adler, thank you for believing me when no one else would." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, compassion, perhaps, or understanding. He nodded once before stepping outside into the night. Penelope watched him go, wondering what kind of man would so readily believe a stranger's wild tale and offer help without hesitation. Whatever his reasons, she was grateful. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax slightly, knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Victor returned an hour later, his expression serious but calm. "No sign of pursuit," he told her. "They must have lost your trail when darkness fell." Martha served a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. As they ate, Victor explained that the cabin belonged to his ranch hand, Tom Coleman, who was currently away delivering horses to a buyer in Montana Territory. "Martha stays here even when Tom's gone," Victor said. She's as good with a shotgun as any man I know. Martha snorted at this but looked pleased. You'll stay here tonight, Victor continued, addressing Penelope. Tomorrow we'll move you to the main house at the AAA. It's more defensible and I've got men there I trust. I can't impose, Penelope began, but Victor cut her off with a wave of his hand. This isn't about imposition, Miss Michaels. This is about keeping you alive long enough to expose what Lancaster and his associates have been doing. Why are you helping me? Penelope asked. You don't know me. This could be dangerous for you. Victor was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the cup of coffee in his hands. My brother was on that stagecoach, he said finally, his voice low. He survived barely. He's at my ranch now, recovering. He told me there was something odd about the robbery, that the men seemed to know exactly what they were looking for, exactly where to find the strongbox, almost like they had inside information. He looked up at her. When you mentioned Lancaster and the Blackwell gang, it confirmed what I'd suspected. Penelope felt a chill run through her. I'm so sorry about your brother. Nathan's tough, Victor said with a hint of pride. He'll pull through, but others weren't so lucky. A young woman and her father died in that robbery. Another man might not make it. His jaw tightened. Lancaster and his friends need to answer for that. The gravity of the situation settled over Penelope. This wasn't just about saving her own life anymore. It was about justice for those who had died or been injured and preventing more people from being hurt. I'll do whatever I need to, she said firmly. I won't let them get away with this. Victor studied her face, as if assessing her resolve. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded. Get some rest, Miss Michaels. Tomorrow will be a long day. Martha showed Penelope to a small bedroom at the back of the cabin. The bed was narrow but comfortable, with a handmade quilt that smelled of lavender and sunshine. Despite her exhaustion, Penelope found sleep elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lancaster's cold smile as he counted out money to the Blackwell gang's leader, or Deputy Sims's calculating gaze as he kept watch. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke with a start to the sound of voices. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains. Penelope strained to hear the conversation in the other room. At least 5 of them, moving toward town. A man's voice was saying, not Victor's. They must have tracked her this far, came Victor's response. We need to move quickly. Is the wagon ready? Yes, boss. Loaded with hay like you asked. Good. Tell no one about our guest, understand? As far as anyone knows, Martha is bringing supplies back to the ranch. Penelope rose and dressed quickly in the same dirty clothes from the day before. Her ankle was still tender, but much improved. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Victor, Martha, and a young ranch hand engaged in serious conversation around the table. Ah, Miss Michaels, Victor said when he noticed her. This is Billy, one of my men. He's brought news that your pursuers are still searching the area. Billy, who couldn't have been more than 20, touched the brim of his hat. Madam, we're changing our plans, Victor continued. You'll travel to the ranch with Martha in a wagon. I've had Billy load it with hay. You'll need to hide underneath it. It's not the most comfortable way to travel, Martha said apologetically, but it's the safest for now. I'll do whatever is necessary, Penelope assured them. Within the hour, they were ready to depart. The wagon was indeed filled with hay, with a small hollow space created underneath where Penelope would hide. Billy would drive the wagon, with Martha beside him playing the role of a ranch hand's wife heading home after a trip to a neighboring homestead for supplies. I'll ride ahead and make sure the way is clear, Victor told them. If there's trouble, Billy knows what to do. Before Penelope climbed into her hiding place, Victor pulled her aside. This will work, he said quietly, his confidence unwavering. By sundown, you'll be safe at the AAA. From there, we can plan our next move. Penelope nodded, trying to match his certainty. I trust you, Mr. Adler. Something flickered in his eyes at her words, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. He cleared his throat. Victor, please, I think we're past formalities at this point. Victor, she repeated, offering him a small smile. And I'm Penelope. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before Martha called that they were ready to depart. Penelope climbed into the wagon and settled into the concealed space beneath the hay. It was cramped and dusty, but secure. The journey was as uncomfortable as Martha had warned. Every bump in the road jarred Penelope's injured ankle, and the hay made her nose itch terribly. But discomfort was a small price to pay for safety. She used the time to think about what she had witnessed and what might come next. Lancaster had always made her uneasy, even before she'd seen him with the outlaws. There was something calculating in the way he watched people, especially women. As the town's most eligible bachelor, he had made overtures toward her shortly after her arrival, inviting her to dinner, sending flowers to the schoolhouse. She had politely declined, citing her need to establish herself professionally before engaging in social activities. In truth, something about his perfectly polished manners felt false, masking something darker beneath. Now she understood why. The wagon rolled to a stop, jolting Penelope from her thoughts. She heard muffled voices, Billy speaking to someone. Her heart raced. Had they been discovered? Just taking supplies back to the AAA, Billy was saying, his voice deliberately casual. Mrs. Coleman here's been visiting her sister. Seen anyone unusual on the road? A man's voice asked, one Penelope recognized with a chill. Deputy Sims. No, sir, just the usual traffic. Something wrong. Looking for a woman, the new schoolteacher. She's gone missing, might be in danger. Martha spoke up, her tone perfectly concerned. Miss Michaels. Oh my, that's terrible. I just saw her at church on Sunday, such a nice young lady. What happened? Not sure yet, Sims replied, sounding unconvincing even to Penelope's ears. If you see her, let us know right away. Don't approach her, she might be confused, suffering delusions. Of course, Deputy, Billy assured him. We'll keep an eye out. The exchange continued for another minute, Sims asking if they'd seen anyone suspicious, Martha expressing appropriate concern for the poor, confused schoolteacher. Finally, the deputy let them pass. Penelope released the breath she'd been holding. They continued for what felt like hours, the wagon occasionally stopping as Billy checked to ensure they weren't being followed. Finally, she felt the wagon turn, the surface beneath the wheels changing from hard-packed dirt to something smoother. We're here, Martha called softly. Wait until we're in the barn before you come out. Minutes later, the wagon rolled to a stop. Penelope heard the barn doors close, then Billy's voice giving the all-clear. Carefully, she emerged from her hiding place, hay clinging to her hair and dress as she gulped in fresh air. Victor was waiting, his expression relieved when he saw her. Any trouble? He asked Billy. Ran into Deputy Sims about 5 miles back, Billy reported. He's looking for Miss Michaels, says she's missing and confused. Victor's jaw tightened. They're already spinning their story. He turned to Penelope. Come, let's get you settled. You must be exhausted. The main house of the AAA ranch was larger than Penelope had expected, a 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, it was simply but comfortably furnished, with polished wooden floors covered by woven rugs and walls adorned with a few paintings of Western landscapes. My mother's influence, Victor explained when he caught Penelope admiring one of the paintings. She insisted we have some civilization out here in the wilderness. She passed 5 years ago, but I've kept things as she liked them. It's lovely, Penelope said sincerely. You must miss her very much." "Every day," Victor admitted. "She would have liked you someone educated from the East. She was always telling me I needed more refined company." A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. Victor showed Penelope to a bedroom on the second floor. "This was my sister's room before she married and moved to Denver," he explained. "There are clothes in the wardrobe that might fit you. They're a few years out of fashion, but clean and serviceable." "Thank you," Penelope said, suddenly overwhelmed by his kindness. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me yesterday." Victor's expression grew serious. "I'm just glad I was riding that particular stretch of road at that particular time." He paused, seeming to debate whether to say more. "I'll have Martha bring up some hot water so you can wash. Dinner will be ready in about an hour, and I'd like you to meet Nathan, my brother. He's been asking about you." After Victor left, Penelope sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up to her. She was safe for now, but Lancaster and his associates wouldn't stop looking for her. And eventually, she would have to confront them to make them answer for their crimes. The thought was terrifying. But as she looked around at the comfortable room, evidence of Victor Adler's trust and generosity, she felt a renewed determination. He believed her. He was willing to help her fight for justice. She would not let him or the victims of the stagecoach robbery down. Martha brought hot water as promised, along with a bar of lavender-scented soap and clean towels. The older woman clucked sympathetically when she saw the state of Penelope's dress. "That'll need a good soaking," she said, helping Penelope out of the filthy garment. "In the meantime, there's plenty in the wardrobe to choose from. Miss Sarah was about your size, maybe a bit taller." The warm water was heavenly against Penelope's skin, washing away dirt, sweat, and some of the fear that had clung to her. She found a simple blue dress in the wardrobe that fit reasonably well, though it was indeed a bit long. She pinned up her damp hair as best she could without a maid's assistance and made her way downstairs. Victor was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his expression warming when he saw her. He'd changed as well, into a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from his own washing up. "You look much refreshed," he said. "How's the ankle?" "Much better, thank you." Penelope tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach at his appreciative gaze. This was hardly the time or circumstance for such feelings. Victor offered his arm. "Nathan's eager to meet you. He's in the study, still not up to joining us at the table, I'm afraid." Nathan Adler was propped up on a settee in the study, his complexion pale but his eyes alert and intelligent. The family resemblance between the brothers was striking, though Nathan was slighter in build and perhaps a few years younger. "So you're the brave schoolteacher who stirred up this hornet's nest," Nathan said by way of greeting. His voice was weaker than Victor's but held the same directness. "Nathan," Victor said with a note of warning. "It's all right," Penelope assured him, taking a seat in the chair Victor indicated. "Your brother has a right to be direct, considering the circumstances." She turned to Nathan. "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances, Mr. Adler. I'm very sorry about what happened to you." Nathan waved away her sympathy. "I'm alive, which is more than I can say for the Morgans, the father and daughter who died. Good people they were, just heading to visit family in Boise." His expression hardened. "Victor tells me you saw Lancaster and Sims dividing the spoils with the Blackwell gang." Penelope nodded, recounting what she had witnessed in detail. As she spoke, she noticed Victor watching her intently from where he stood by the fireplace, his expression grave. "I knew something wasn't right about that robbery," Nathan said when she finished. "The gang knew exactly which stage coach to hit and precisely when the gold shipment would be aboard. They didn't even bother checking the other passengers' belongings, went straight for the strongbox. Inside information, Victor agreed. But knowing Lancaster and Sims were directly involved changes everything. They discussed the situation through dinner, which was served in the study so Nathan could participate. The food was simple but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. "The way I see it," Nathan said as Martha cleared the dishes, "we need evidence that will stand up in court. Your testimony is crucial, Miss Michaels, but it won't be enough on its own." "We need to catch them in the act," Victor agreed, "or find documentation of their dealings with the Blackwell gang." "Lancaster keeps a ledger," Penelope said suddenly, remembering something she had noticed during one of her visits to the bank. "A small red book he always has with him. Once, when I was at the bank depositing my teaching wages, he was writing in it and quickly put it away when he saw me looking. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now." The brothers exchanged a look. "If that ledger contains records of his dealings with the gang, it would be exactly the evidence we need," Victor said thoughtfully. "But how do we get it?" Penelope asked. "He'll have it well guarded, especially now." "Leave that to me," Victor said, his expression determined. "I have connections in town, people who owe me favors, and Lancaster doesn't know that I'm involved in this. As far as he's concerned, I'm just a rancher who rarely comes to town." "It's too dangerous," Penelope protested. "If they discover you're helping me, it's already dangerous," Victor countered gently. "For all of us. But some things are worth the risk." Their eyes met across the table, and Penelope felt that inexplicable flutter again. There was something about Victor Adler, his quiet confidence, his unwavering moral compass, the way he had believed her without hesitation, that affected her in ways she hadn't expected. Later that evening, after Nathan had retired to his room and the house had grown quiet, Penelope found herself unable to sleep. She wrapped herself in a shawl she had found in the wardrobe and made her way downstairs, thinking a glass of water might help. She was surprised to find Victor still awake, sitting in a chair by the fireplace in the study, a book open in his lap, though he didn't appear to be reading it. He looked up at her entrance, closing the book. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Penelope shook her head. "Too much on my mind, I suppose." Victor nodded in understanding. "That's natural, given everything that's happened." Penelope hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to intrude on his solitude. "Please join me," Victor said, gesturing to the chair opposite his. "I find company sometimes helps chase away troubling thoughts." Penelope settled into the chair, drawing the shawl more tightly around her shoulders. The fire had burned low, casting the room in a warm, dim glow. "What were you reading?" she asked, nodding toward the book in his lap. Victor glanced down at it with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Tennyson's poems. Another of my mother's influences. She believed cowboys needed culture as much as anyone. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was." Victor's expression softened with memory. "Came out here as a bride of 18, not knowing what to expect. My father was a difficult man in many ways, but she never lost her grace or her determination to bring beauty into our lives." He looked up at Penelope. "What about your family? You mentioned you came from Boston." Penelope nodded, feeling the familiar ache that accompanied thoughts of her parents. "My father was a professor of literature at Harvard. My mother taught piano. They died last winter, influenza." "I'm sorry," Victor said quietly. "I couldn't stay in Boston afterward," Penelope continued. "Too many memories. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Idaho Territory, it seemed like fate, a chance to start fresh in a place where everything didn't remind me of what I'd lost." She gave a rueful smile. "I never imagined I'd end up in the middle of a conspiracy involving bank presidents and outlaws." Life rarely follows the paths we expect, Victor observed. For what it's worth, I think you've shown remarkable courage. Many would have remained silent out of fear, even knowing what was at stake. His words warmed her more than the fire. I could say the same of you. Taking in a stranger, believing her wild tale, risking your safety and your ranch to help her. Victor was quiet for a moment, gazing into the dying embers of the fire. When I found you on that road, he said finally, there was something in your eyes, a determination, a fierce honesty that spoke to me. I've always believed I'm a good judge of character. I knew you were telling the truth. The way he looked at her made Penelope's heart quicken. There was admiration in his gaze, yes, but something more, a connection that seemed to transcend their brief acquaintance. We should both try to get some rest, Victor said after a moment, breaking the spell. Tomorrow will be a busy day. I plan to ride into town to gather information and see if I can learn more about this ledger of Lancaster's. Be careful, Penelope said, unable to mask her concern. Victor's expression softened. I will. Lancaster has no reason to suspect me of anything. As far as anyone knows, I'm just a rancher coming to town for supplies and perhaps a drink at the saloon. They said their goodnights, and Penelope returned to her room, her mind still swirling with thoughts of danger, of justice, and increasingly of Victor Adler. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Penelope joined Victor, Nathan, and Martha for breakfast in the dining room. Nathan was looking stronger, able to sit at the table though he tired quickly. I've been thinking about that ledger, Nathan said as they ate. If it contains what we suspect, Lancaster won't keep it at the bank where clerks or customers might see it. He'll have it somewhere private. His home, most likely, Victor agreed. He lives above the bank, doesn't he? Penelope nodded. Yes, in an apartment on the second floor. There's a private staircase at the back of the building. That complicates things, Victor mused. Breaking into the bank is one thing, getting into his private quarters is another matter entirely. What if we didn't need to break in? Penelope said slowly, an idea forming. What if I returned to town openly? 3 pairs of eyes turned to her in alarm. Absolutely not, Victor said immediately. They're looking for you. It's too dangerous. Hear me out, Penelope insisted. They're spinning a story that I'm missing and confused, possibly delusional. What if I played into that? I could return to town claiming to have gotten lost, maybe fallen and hit my head. I've been wandering, disoriented, and have only just found my way back. And then what? Nathan asked, intrigued despite his obvious concern. Lancaster will want to speak with me to assess what I remember, Penelope continued. He needs to know whether I still pose a threat. If I convince him that I'm confused about what I saw, that my memories are jumbled from my accident, he might lower his guard. That could create an opportunity. Victor was shaking his head before she finished. It's too risky. If Lancaster suspects you're lying, he won't, Penelope said with more confidence than she felt. I've had some experience with acting. My mother insisted I participate in theatrical productions at church. I can be convincing. It's not worth the risk, Victor insisted, his expression troubled. Isn't it? Penelope challenged. 3 people are dead, Mr. Adler. Your brother nearly joined them. How many more will die if the Blackwell gang continues operating with inside information and protection from the law? The room fell silent, tension hanging in the air between them. She has a point, Victor, Nathan said finally. It's dangerous, yes, but it might be our best chance at getting that ledger. Victor's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Everyone tensed. Victor moved swiftly to the window. 3 riders coming up the drive, he reported. One of them is Deputy Sims. Penelope's blood ran cold. They found me. We don't know that, Victor said, though his expression was grim. They could be here on other business. He turned to Martha. "Take Miss Michaels upstairs to the storage room behind the linen closet. Stay with her until I come for you." Martha nodded, already guiding Penelope toward the stairs. "This way, quickly." As they hurried up the stairs, Penelope glanced back to see Victor checking his revolver before tucking it into his waistband at the small of his back, concealed by his jacket. The sight sent a chill through her. If Deputy Sims had indeed tracked her to the AAA, what would happen to Victor and his household? The storage room was small and dusty, with trunks and boxes stacked along the walls. A tiny window high up provided the only light. Martha and Penelope settled on an old trunk, listening intently for any sounds from below. "Victor can handle himself," Martha assured her, noticing Penelope's worried expression. "He was a Union officer in the war, knows how to deal with difficult situations." This was news to Penelope. "He fought in the war," Martha nodded. "Captain in the cavalry. Came back changed like many did, but never lost his sense of what's right." Before Penelope could ask more questions, they heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Both women tensed, but it was Victor's voice that called through the door. "It's safe to come out." They emerged to find Victor waiting, his expression relieved but still troubled. "They're gone. It wasn't about you, at least not directly. They're checking all the outlying properties for signs of you. Deputy Sims made it clear they believe you're unstable and potentially dangerous." "That's ridiculous," Martha huffed. "It's also convenient for them," Victor pointed out. "If they can convince everyone you're mentally unsound, your accusations won't be taken seriously." Penelope felt a surge of anger. "All the more reason for my plan to work. If I return claiming to be confused about what happened, they'll think their strategy is working. It might make Lancaster careless." Victor studied her face, conflict evident in his eyes. "I don't like it," he said finally, "but you're right, it might be our best chance at getting the evidence we need." He sighed. "If we do this, we do it carefully with every precaution. And I'll be nearby the entire time." Relief washed over Penelope, followed quickly by trepidation. She was proposing to walk straight into the lion's den, to face the very men who had tried to kill her. But the alternative, hiding while Lancaster and his conspirators continued their crimes, was unthinkable. "Thank you," she said simply. Victor nodded, his expression still troubled. "Don't thank me yet. This plan of yours is dangerous enough to get us all killed if something goes wrong." They spent the rest of the day refining the plan. Penelope would return to town the following morning, making her appearance at the general store where she knew the owner's wife to be sympathetic and talkative. Her story would be that she had been upset after receiving bad news from home and had gone for a walk to clear her head. She had fallen, hit her head, and wandered disoriented for days, only gradually finding her way back to town with fragmented memories of what had happened. "The key," Victor emphasized, "is to make Lancaster believe you're no threat while giving yourself an opportunity to locate that ledger." "And what if I can't find it?" Penelope asked. "Then we try something else," Victor said firmly. "But at the first sign of danger, you get out. We'll have a signal if you stand at your window and adjust the curtains 3 times. I'll know you need help immediately." "Where will you be?" "Closer than they'll suspect," was all Victor would say. "The less you know about that, the more convincing your confusion will be if they question you." That evening, after dinner, Victor invited Penelope to join him for a walk around the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. They strolled in companionable silence for a time, their path taking them past a small creek that burbled cheerfully over stones worn smooth by time and water. "I want you to reconsider," Victor said finally, stopping to face her. "This plan, it's too dangerous. We can find another way." Penelope shook her head gently. We both know this is our best chance. I'll be careful." Victor's expression was troubled. "In the short time I've known you, Miss Michaels, I've come to care about what happens to you, the thought of sending you back into danger." The way he looked at her, with concern and something deeper, something that made her heart race, momentarily stole Penelope's breath. "I'm not as fragile as I might appear, Mr. Adler," she said softly. "And some things are worth the risk." They stood close, the tension between them palpable in the gathering twilight. For a moment, Penelope thought Victor might reach for her, might pull her into his arms. Instead, he took a step back, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "We should head back," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You'll need your rest for tomorrow." As they walked back to the house, Penelope wondered what might have happened if he hadn't stepped away. The attraction between them was undeniable, but the circumstances, the danger, the uncertainty made it impossible to explore. Yet she couldn't help but imagine a different time, a different situation, where they might have the freedom to acknowledge the connection growing between them. Morning came too quickly. Penelope dressed in the same blue dress she had worn before, which Martha had carefully pressed. Her hair was arranged simply, and she wore no jewelry or adornments that might suggest she had been comfortable or cared for during her ordeal. Victor was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, his expression a mask of calm though his eyes betrayed his concern. "Ready?" he asked. Penelope nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Nathan, who had insisted on being present despite his weakness, clasped her hand. "Godspeed, Miss Michaels. Remember, at the first sign of trouble, I signal," she finished for him. "I will." Victor escorted her to the wagon where Billy waited to drive her. They would take a circuitous route that would bring her to the edge of town, where she would make her way to the general store on foot, appearing appropriately disheveled and disoriented. "I'll be watching," Victor assured her as he helped her into the wagon. His hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong—" "I know," she said, squeezing his hand before releasing it. "I'll be careful." The journey to town felt both too long and too short. Too much time to think about all that could go wrong, yet not enough time to prepare herself fully for the role she must play. When they reached the agreed-upon spot, Penelope took a deep breath, deliberately mussed her hair, and smudged a bit of dirt on her face. "Remember," Billy said as she climbed down from the wagon, "the boss will be nearby. You won't see him, but he'll see you." The knowledge was both comforting and nerve-wracking. Penelope nodded her thanks to Billy, then turned and began her walk toward town, deliberately making her gait unsteady, as if she were still suffering the effects of her accident. The plan worked perfectly, almost too perfectly. Mrs. Harris at the general store reacted exactly as expected, with loud exclamations of concern and relief that drew the attention of everyone in the vicinity. Within minutes, Penelope was surrounded by concerned townsfolk, all asking questions at once. And then Deputy Sims appeared, pushing through the crowd with an expression of professional concern that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Miss Michaels," he said, taking her arm in a grip that appeared solicitous but felt controlling. "We've been so worried. Where have you been?" Penelope swayed slightly as if dizzy. I'm not entirely sure," she said, her voice deliberately weak and confused. "I went for a walk, received bad news from Boston, needed to think, then I fell, I think. Everything after that is hazy." Sims exchanged a look with someone behind her. Penelope didn't need to turn to know it was Lancaster. She could feel his presence, could sense his calculating gaze on her back. "You're clearly exhausted," came Lancaster's smooth voice. "Deputy, perhaps we should get Miss Michaels to Dr. Whitman's office. She may have suffered a concussion." "Yes, of course," Sims agreed. "This way, Miss Michaels." Penelope allowed herself to be led away, casting one furtive glance around the crowd as if searching for a friendly face. She saw no sign of Victor, but she hadn't expected to. He had promised to remain hidden but watching. Dr. Whitman's examination was brief but thorough. The elderly physician asked several questions about her symptoms and experiences, listening with professional detachment to her carefully constructed story of confusion and disorientation. "A mild concussion, most likely," he concluded. "Rest is what you need, young lady, plenty of rest and quiet." "I'll see that she gets it," Lancaster said from where he stood by the door. "We've been so concerned, Doctor. Miss Michaels has been saying some concerning things before she disappeared. Accusations of a most disturbing nature, Doctor." Whitman glanced between them, his expression carefully neutral. "Confusion and even hallucinations can accompany head injuries," he offered. "Best not to place too much stock in anything she might have said or believed she saw." Lancaster's smile was thin. "My thoughts exactly, Doctor. In fact, I've taken the liberty of preparing a room at my residence above the bank. It would be inappropriate for Miss Michaels to return to her boarding house in this condition, and as a leading citizen of this community, I feel responsible for her welfare." Alarm bells rang in Penelope's mind, though she kept her expression appropriately vague and confused. This was an unexpected development and a dangerous one. Being in Lancaster's home would provide an opportunity to search for the ledger, but it also placed her directly in the lion's den with no easy escape. "That's very kind," she murmured, pretending not to notice the triumphant gleam in Lancaster's eyes. "It's settled then," he said smoothly. "I'll have my housekeeper prepare everything. You'll want for nothing during your recovery, Miss Michaels." "Except my freedom and possibly my life," Penelope thought grimly, but she merely nodded weakly. Dr. Whitman seemed mildly concerned by the arrangement but said nothing to contradict Lancaster. Few people in town would, Penelope realized. His position and wealth gave him too much power. An hour later, Penelope found herself installed in a well-appointed guest room in Lancaster's residence above the bank. The room was comfortable enough, with a four-poster bed, a small writing desk, and a window overlooking the main street. It was through this window that she was to signal Victor if needed. Lancaster's housekeeper, a pinched-faced woman named Mrs. Grayson, had brought her a light meal and informed her that Mr. Lancaster would check on her later, after she'd had time to rest. The woman had then locked the door from the outside, "For your safety, miss, in case you get confused again," leaving Penelope effectively a prisoner. As soon as she was alone, Penelope began a careful exploration of the room. The window could be opened, but it was a long drop to the alley below, not an option unless absolutely necessary. The lock on the door was solid. The furniture was too heavy to use as a barricade if needed. She was contemplating her next move when she heard a soft tapping at the window. Startled, she turned to see a small pebble strike the glass. Moving cautiously to the window, she peered out and down. In the shadows of the alley stood Victor, his face upturned toward her window. Relief flooded through her. She raised the window as quietly as possible. "What are you doing?" she whispered, alarmed. "Someone might see you." "I saw them take you to Lancaster's," Victor replied, his voice barely carrying to her. "This wasn't part of the plan." "I know, but it might work to our advantage. The ledger is likely here somewhere." Victor's expression was grim. "It's too dangerous. We need to get you out." "Not yet," Penelope insisted. "I can do this. Just stay close." Before Victor could argue further, Penelope heard footsteps approaching her door. "Someone's coming," she whispered urgently. "Go." She closed the window quickly and hurried back to the bed, arranging herself to appear as if she had been resting. The key turned in the lock, and the door opened to reveal Lancaster himself, impeccably dressed as always, a solicitous smile on his face that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Miss Michaels," he said smoothly. "I trust you're feeling more comfortable now." Penelope nodded weakly. "Yes. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Lancaster." Lancaster moved into the room, closing the door behind him, but not, Penelope noted with a mixture of relief and trepidation, locking it. "It's no trouble at all," he said, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. "I feel somewhat responsible, you know. Perhaps if I had paid more attention when you first came to me with your concerns, all this might have been avoided." Penelope forced herself to appear confused. "Concerns? I'm sorry I don't. My memory is still rather foggy." Lancaster studied her face carefully. "You don't remember coming to me about some observations you thought you had made about me and certain associates?" Penelope feigned concentration, then distress. "I remember feeling very upset about something, but it's all jumbled. Dr. Whitman says that's normal after a head injury." "Indeed it is," Lancaster agreed, though his eyes remained sharp and evaluating. "Perhaps it's best not to strain yourself trying to remember. Some things are better forgotten, don't you agree?" The threat was thinly veiled, but Penelope pretended not to notice. "I suppose so," she said hesitantly, "though it's frustrating having these gaps in my memory." Lancaster patted her hand, his touch making her skin crawl, though she forced herself not to recoil. "Don't worry, my dear. I'm sure everything will become clear in time. Or perhaps not. Either way, you'll be well cared for here until you're fully recovered." His meaning was clear. She would remain his prisoner until he was convinced she posed no threat, or until she conveniently disappeared for good. "You're too kind," Penelope murmured, lowering her eyes to hide the anger and fear that threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed facade. "Rest now," Lancaster said, rising. "Mrs. Grayson will bring you dinner later, and don't worry about your position at the school. I've informed the school board that you'll need at least a week to recover. They send their best wishes." With a final, calculating look, Lancaster left the room. Penelope heard the key turn in the lock once more. She waited several minutes to ensure he was truly gone before moving to the window again. There was no sign of Victor in the alley below, but she hadn't expected there to be. He would have withdrawn to a safer vantage point. Penelope returned to the bed, her mind racing. She was effectively trapped, but she was also exactly where she needed to be to find the ledger. The question was how to search Lancaster's rooms without being caught. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, after a tense dinner during which Lancaster continued his careful probing of her memories, Penelope heard raised voices from downstairs. Lancaster excused himself to investigate, instructing Mrs. Grayson to stay with Penelope. The housekeeper, clearly annoyed at being made to play nursemaid, pursed her lips. "I've linens to attend to," she said shortly. "You stay put and rest like the doctor ordered. I'll check on you after I've seen to my duties." As soon as Mrs. Grayson left, locking the door behind her, Penelope moved into action. She had observed earlier that the lock, while solid, was an older model. During her years in Boston, she had occasionally locked herself out of her father's study and had learned a trick or two about such locks. Using a hairpin from her coiffure, Penelope worked at the lock, her heart pounding with each second that passed. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, she heard the satisfying click of the mechanism releasing. Cautiously, she opened the door and peered into the hallway. Empty. The voices from downstairs continued. She could make out Lancaster's cultured tones, now raised in apparent anger, and another man's rougher voice responding. Moving silently, Penelope made her way down the hall to what appeared to be Lancaster's study. The door was closed but not locked. Inside, she found a well-appointed room with a large desk, bookshelves, and a small safe in one corner. The safe was the obvious place for Lancaster to keep something as valuable as the incriminating ledger, but Penelope had no hope of opening it. Instead, she began a careful search of the desk, mindful of replacing everything exactly as she found it. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of correspondence, she found a small red leather-bound book. Her hands trembling with excitement, Penelope opened it to find pages of neat entries, dates, amounts, and initials. Most entries were innocuous banking transactions, but interspersed among them were others marked with a small symbol, a circle with a line through it, followed by larger sums and the initials BG. Blackwell Gang. It had to be, knowing she had only minutes before Lancaster or Mrs. Grayson might return. Penelope quickly memorized several of the entries, including dates and amounts. She considered taking the ledger but decided against it. Its absence would immediately alert Lancaster. As she carefully replaced the book and closed the drawer, she heard footsteps approaching. There was no time to return to her room. Looking around desperately, Penelope ducked behind the heavy curtains at the window, pressing herself against the wall and hardly daring to breathe. The door opened. From her hiding place, Penelope could see Lancaster enter, followed by a rough-looking man she didn't recognize. "This is unacceptable," Lancaster was saying, his cultured voice tight with anger. "I paid for professional work, not amateur blundering." "We searched everywhere," the man growled. "The schoolteacher wasn't at any of the homesteads we checked. She's either left the territory or someone's hiding her." "She hasn't left," Lancaster said with certainty. "Not without money or transportation. Someone's helping her, but who? She hasn't been here long enough to make allies." "What about the Adler ranch?" the man suggested. "We didn't check there." Lancaster considered this. "Victor Adler rarely comes to town. I doubt he'd even know who she is, let alone have reason to help her." "Still, might be worth checking," the man persisted. "His brother was on that stagecoach, remember? If he's suspicious about the robbery." Lancaster's expression darkened. "A valid point. Very well, take Johnson and Waters and pay a visit to the Triple tomorrow. Be discreet. Adler has a lot of friends in this territory. If the schoolteacher is there, bring her to me. If not, well, perhaps Mr. Adler could suffer an unfortunate accident. His ranch would make a valuable addition to our holdings." Penelope felt sick with fear, not for herself, but for Victor and his household. Lancaster was planning to expand his criminal activities to include murder and land theft. "And what about the schoolteacher here?" the man asked. "You sure she don't remember nothing?" Lancaster's smile was cold. "Either she truly doesn't remember what she saw, or she's a better actress than I gave her credit for. Either way, she won't be a problem much longer. I've arranged for her to have a tragic relapse tonight. Poor thing will wander in her confused state right out that window. Such a sad end to a promising young life." Penelope's blood ran cold. Lancaster was planning to murder her tonight and make it look like an accident. "Mrs. Grayson won't be a problem?" the man asked. "Mrs. Grayson will be visiting her sister and boys from tomorrow, with a generous bonus for her years of service and her understanding of the need for discretion." The two men left the study, still discussing details of their plans. Penelope remained frozen behind the curtain, her mind racing. She had to warn Victor about the planned visit to his ranch. And she had to escape before Lancaster carried out his plan to kill her. As soon as she was certain the men were gone, Penelope slipped from her hiding place and hurried back to her room. She had barely locked the door behind her when she heard Mrs. Grayson approaching. "Miss Michaels," the housekeeper called through the door. "Are you decent? "Mr. Lancaster asked me to bring you some tea." "Just a moment," Penelope called, quickly arranging herself on the bed to appear as if she had been resting all along. "You may come in now." The door opened to reveal Mrs. Grayson with a tea tray. The woman's expression was unreadable as she set the tray on the bedside table. "Mr. Lancaster thought this might help you sleep," she said, pouring a cup and adding a generous amount of sugar. "Drink it while it's hot." Drugged, Penelope realized. The tea was drugged to ensure she wouldn't resist whatever accident Lancaster had planned for her. She smiled weakly and took the cup. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Mrs. Grayson watched as Penelope raised the cup to her lips and pretended to sip. "All of it now," the housekeeper instructed. "Doctor's orders." Penelope took another pretend sip, then allowed her eyelids to droop slightly as if already feeling effects. "It is making me quite sleepy," she murmured. Mrs. Grayson nodded with satisfaction. "That's right. Just finish your tea and rest. Mr. Lancaster will check on you later." When the housekeeper left, Penelope waited until she heard the key turn in the lock before moving to the window. She opened it and poured the drugged tea into the alley below, then returned to the bed and arranged the pillows under the covers to resemble a sleeping form. Now she needed to signal Victor. Standing by the window, she adjusted the curtains 3 times, the pre-arranged signal for danger. Then she waited, her heart pounding, for some indication that he had seen. Minutes passed with no response. Penelope began to fear that Victor wasn't watching, that he had returned to his ranch, unaware of the danger both she and his family now faced. Then she saw a brief flash of light from the shadows across the street. Victor was there. Relief washed over her, quickly followed by renewed determination. She needed to convey not just that she was in danger, but the specific threat to the ranch. Looking around the room, Penelope's gaze fell on a small notepad and pencil on the writing desk. Quickly, she wrote a message. "Lancaster plans to send men to your ranch tomorrow. Claiming I wandered in confusion. Says I'll have accident tonight. Found ledger in desk drawer. Has dates and amounts of payments to BG." She folded the note tightly, then looked for something to weight it. Her hairpin would have to do. She attached the note to it, then waited for another glimpse of Victor's position. When she saw another flash of light, she carefully aimed and threw the weighted note out the window toward the source of the light. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought the note had fallen short or gone astray. Then she saw a figure dart forward from the shadows, retrieve something from the ground, and retreat. The note had been received. Now Penelope had to focus on her own escape. Lancaster would likely wait until the household was asleep before carrying out his plan. That gave her perhaps a few hours. The window was her only option, but it was a significant drop to the alley below one that could result in serious injury. As she contemplated her predicament, Penelope noticed something she hadn't before: a trellis along the wall near her window, partially obscured by the darkness and the angle. It was covered with some kind of climbing vine and looked sturdy enough to possibly support her weight. If she could reach it, she might be able to climb down. It would be dangerous, especially in a dress, but less dangerous than remaining for Lancaster's accident. Penelope quickly changed from the dress into the simplest clothes she could find in the wardrobe, provided for her a plain skirt and shirtwaist that would allow for more freedom of movement. Then she waited, listening intently for any sounds in the house. Eventually, the household grew quiet. Penelope heard Lancaster's study door close, followed by his footsteps moving toward what she presumed was his bedroom. The housekeeper's movements had ceased some time earlier. It was now or never. Penelope opened the window fully and studied the trellis. It was about 3 feet to her right, a gap she would have to jump to reach. Taking a deep breath, she climbed onto the windowsill, steadied herself, and leaped. Her hands caught the wooden lattice of the trellis, which creaked alarmingly but held. Moving carefully, testing each handhold and foothold before trusting her weight to it, Penelope began the descent. The rough wood scraped her hands, and the climbing plant's thorns scratched at her arms, but she continued steadily downward. When she was about halfway down, disaster struck. A section of the trellis pulled away from the wall with a crack that sounded deafening in the quiet night. Penelope felt herself falling backward. She landed hard on her back in the alley below, the breath knocked from her lungs by the impact. For a moment she lay stunned, unable to move or breathe. Then strong hands were lifting her, supporting her. "Penelope," Victor's voice was urgent but hushed. "Are you hurt?" She managed to draw a breath, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "I don't think anything's broken," she gasped. "Just bruised." Victor's face in the dim light was a mask of concern and relief. "I got your note. We need to get you out of here before Lancaster discovers you're gone." He helped her to her feet, keeping an arm around her waist for support. From above came the sound of a window opening. "What was that noise?" Lancaster's voice called out. Victor pulled Penelope deeper into the shadows of the alley. "This way," he whispered. "Quickly." They moved as silently and swiftly as Penelope's bruised body would allow, making their way through back alleys until they reached the edge of town where Billy waited with horses. "Boss," Billy greeted them with obvious relief, "was getting worried." "Change of plans," Victor said tersely, helping Penelope mount one of the horses. "Lancaster's sending men to the ranch tomorrow. We need to warn Nathan and the others, then get somewhere safe with Miss Michaels until we can bring the law into this." "What law?" Penelope asked as Victor mounted his own horse. "The sheriff is Lancaster's friend, and Deputy Sims is involved in the conspiracy." "Not all lawmen are corrupt," Victor said grimly. "I have a friend, a federal marshal based in Boise. If we can get word to him with what we know, Lancaster and his associates won't stand a chance." They rode hard through the night, taking a circuitous route to avoid any of Lancaster's men who might be watching the main roads. Penelope's body ached from her fall and from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she pressed on without complaint. By dawn, they had reached the Triple ranch. The household was quickly roused, and Victor explained the situation to Nathan and his ranch hands. "They'll likely arrive midday," Victor concluded. "We need to be long gone by then." "I'm not abandoning the ranch," Nathan protested. "This is our home." "We're not abandoning it," Victor assured him. "We're making a strategic withdrawal until we can return with the law on our side. Billy and the men will remain hidden on the property to ensure Lancaster's thugs don't cause any damage. But you and Martha and Miss Michaels, of course, need to be elsewhere." "Where?" Martha asked practically. "The old hunting cabin in the high country," Victor decided. "It's remote, defensible, and few people know of its existence." Preparations were made quickly. Food, blankets, ammunition, and other necessities were packed. Nathan, still weak from his injuries, protested the plan to move him, but eventually conceded the necessity. By mid-morning they were ready to depart. Victor had written a detailed letter to his friend, Marshal James Harker, outlining the conspiracy and the evidence Penelope had discovered. Billy would deliver it to the telegraph office in the neighboring town of Eagle Rock, where Lancaster had less influence. "Be careful," Victor told his foreman. "If Lancaster's men arrive before you return, stay hidden and let them think the place is deserted. No heroics." Billy nodded, his young face serious. "Yes, boss. I'll see the message gets through, then head straight back here." As they prepared to leave, Victor pulled Penelope aside. "Are you sure you're up to this?" he asked quietly. "The cabin is a good 4 hours' ride and the terrain isn't easy." "I'm fine," Penelope assured him, though in truth every muscle in her body protested at the thought of more hours in the saddle. What matters is getting everyone to safety and bringing Lancaster to justice. Victor's expression softened. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure he should. "You're a remarkable woman, Penelope Michaels," he said softly. "I've never known anyone with your courage." The way he looked at her made Penelope's heart race despite her exhaustion. "I could say the same of you, Victor Adler," she replied, her voice equally soft. "Not many men would risk everything to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger," Victor said, his gaze holding hers. "Not anymore." The moment was broken by Nathan calling that they were ready to depart. Victor's hand dropped, and he stepped back, his expression becoming focused and businesslike once more. "Let's go," he said. "We've no time to lose." The journey to the hunting cabin was as arduous as Victor had warned. They traveled on horseback, with Nathan, still weak from his injuries, riding double with Victor. Martha, surprisingly adept in the saddle for a woman of her years, led a pack-horse laden with supplies. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed into the foothills. Forests of pine and aspen gave way to rocky slopes and narrow trails that forced them to ride single file. Penelope, bringing up the rear, marveled at the wild beauty around them even as her body protested each jolt and sway of the horse beneath her. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds were gathering and the temperature dropped noticeably. Victor set a faster pace, clearly concerned about reaching shelter before the storm broke. "Not much farther," he called back encouragingly. "Just over that ridge." The cabin, when they finally reached it, was more substantial than Penelope had expected, a solid structure of logs with a stone chimney, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. A stream burbled nearby, and a small corral stood adjacent to the cabin. "My father built this place," Victor explained as he helped Penelope dismount. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from the long ride. Victor's strong hand steadied her, lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "He came here to hunt, but I think he really just needed somewhere to escape the responsibilities of the ranch from time to time." "It's wonderful," Penelope said sincerely, looking around at the peaceful setting. Despite the circumstances that had brought them here, she could appreciate the beauty and solitude of the place. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A large main room contained a stone fireplace, a table with chairs, and several well-worn armchairs. A small kitchen area occupied one corner. 2 doors led to what Penelope presumed were bedrooms. "Not exactly what you're used to in Boston, I imagine," Victor said as he watched her take in their surroundings. Penelope smiled. "My family valued education and culture over material comforts, Mr. Adler. Our home was filled with books, music, and conversation, but it was far from luxurious." "Victor," he reminded her gently, "after all we've been through, I think we're past formalities." "Victor," she agreed, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed so quickly yet felt so natural. Martha broke the moment with her practical efficiency. "Let's get a fire going and some food on the table," she said. "Nathan needs to rest, and Miss Michaels looks about ready to drop herself." While Victor tended to the horses and Nathan settled into one of the bedrooms, Martha and Penelope worked together to prepare a simple meal. Outside, the promised storm arrived with a crash of thunder and a sudden downpour that drummed on the cabin's roof. "Good timing," Martha observed, glancing out the window at the deluge. "Even if Lancaster's men followed us, they'd be fools to continue tracking in this weather." By the time Victor returned, soaked despite his slicker, the cabin was warm and fragrant with the smell of cooking. He shed his wet outer garments by the door and moved to stand by the fire, running a hand through his damp hair. Penelope couldn't help but notice how the firelight gilded his strong profile, highlighting the determined set of his jaw and the thoughtful depth of his eyes. When he caught her watching, she quickly looked away, busying herself with setting the table. They ate in relative silence, all too tired for much conversation. After the meal, Martha shooed them away while she cleaned up, insisting she needed no help. "You both look dead on your feet," she said firmly. "Miss Michaels, you'll take the second bedroom. Victor, you know where the extra bedrolls are for yourself." Penelope was too exhausted to protest the arrangement. The small bedroom was simply furnished with a narrow bed, a chest for storage, and a small table with a lamp. The window looked out over the clearing, though now she could see nothing but darkness and the silver streaks of rain. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past few days, her discovery of Lancaster's conspiracy, her flight, meeting Victor, her narrow escape from Lancaster's murderous plans. And through it all, the growing awareness of her feelings for Victor Adler. It was foolish, perhaps, to develop such feelings in the midst of danger and uncertainty. They had known each other only days, yet there was something about Victor, his quiet strength, his unflinching moral compass, his gentle concern for others that had touched her heart from their first meeting. A soft knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. "Penelope," Victor's voice was low. "Are you awake?" She rose, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders over her nightgown, and opened the door. Victor stood there, still fully dressed, his expression troubled. "I couldn't sleep," he said by way of explanation. "I thought perhaps you might be feeling the same." Penelope nodded, stepping back to allow him to enter. It was improper, perhaps, but conventional propriety seemed less important here in the wilderness, with danger threatening them all. Victor remained standing just inside the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said. "Even if Marshal Harker receives my message and comes, it could be days. Lancaster won't give up looking for you or for us. What are you suggesting?" Penelope asked, noting the hesitation in his manner. Victor met her eyes directly. "I think you should continue on to Boys with Martha and Nathan once the weather clears. It would be safer for you there, and you could speak directly to the federal authorities." "While you do what?" Penelope asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "I'll return to the ranch," Victor said. "Billy and the men might need help if Lancaster's thugs decide to cause trouble." "That's too dangerous," Penelope protested. "You said yourself that Lancaster is planning to have you killed to take your land." "It's my home," Victor said simply. "I won't abandon it or my men." Penelope studied his face in the dim light of the single lamp. "You're a good man, Victor Adler," she said softly. "But I won't go to Boys without you." Surprise registered in Victor's eyes, followed by something warmer. "Penelope, no," she interrupted firmly. "I've been running since I witnessed that meeting between Lancaster and the Blackwell gang. I'm tired of running. We have evidence now, or at least I've seen it. I know dates, amounts, patterns of payments. Together we're stronger. Separated, Lancaster has a better chance of silencing us both." Victor took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "You're certain it won't be safe?" "Nothing worth doing ever is," Penelope said with a small smile. Victor's expression softened. "You continue to amaze me," he said quietly. "When I found you on that road, I thought I was rescuing a damsel in distress. Instead, I found one of the bravest people I've ever known." The way he looked at her made Penelope's heart race. She took a step toward him, closing some of the distance between them. "I was in distress," she admitted. "But that doesn't mean I'm not also brave. We can be both, I think, afraid and courageous, vulnerable and strong." Victor nodded slowly. I'm learning that, he said. His hand reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. Penelope, I know the timing is complicated. We've known each other only days and we're in the middle of a dangerous situation. But I find myself. He paused, searching for words. I know, Penelope said softly, placing her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. I feel it too. For a moment they stood there, the connection between them almost tangible in the quiet room. Then Victor leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so gentle it was almost reverential. Penelope responded in kind, her free hand coming to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they parted, Victor's eyes were dark with emotion. I should go, he said reluctantly. It's late and you need rest. Penelope nodded, though part of her wanted to ask him to stay. Will you reconsider your plan? She asked instead. About sending me to boys. Victor's smile was rueful. I suspect you wouldn't go even if I insisted. But yes, we'll find another way together. After he left, Penelope returned to her bed, her mind now filled with thoughts not just of danger and conspiracy, but of Victor Adler and the surprising, wonderful connection they had found in the midst of it all. The storm continued through the night and into the following day, keeping them confined to the cabin. They used the time to plan their next moves, discussing various scenarios and contingencies. Victor was clearly in his element, his military training evident in his systematic approach to their predicament. If Billy gets word to Marshal Harker, he explained, drawing a rough map on a piece of paper, Harker will likely gather a small force of deputies and head first to Shoshone City to investigate. Lancaster will deny everything, of course, which is why we need to be there, Penelope insisted. With what I know about the ledger and what Nathan can testify about the stagecoach robbery, we can counter Lancaster's denials. Nathan, who had joined them at the table despite his continuing weakness, nodded in agreement. I remember details now that didn't seem significant at the time. The leader of the gang had a peculiar watch fob, a gold coin of some kind. I saw the same fob on Lancaster's vest the one time he visited me in the doctor's office after the robbery. Victor looked troubled. That's circumstantial at best, without the actual ledger. Then we need to get it, Penelope said with determination. Break into Lancaster's rooms again. Victor shook his head. After your escape, he'll have moved it to a more secure location, possibly the bank vault. Or he might have destroyed it altogether, Nathan suggested grimly. No, Penelope said with certainty. That ledger is his insurance. It contains records of all his transactions, legitimate and otherwise. It's too valuable for him to destroy. Martha, who had been quiet during their discussion, suddenly spoke up. What about Mrs. Grayson? They all turned to look at her. Lancaster's housekeeper, Victor asked. What about her? She knows things, Martha said with the conviction of one servant speaking of another. Housekeepers always do, and Lancaster said she was leaving for boys today with a generous bonus. That sounds to me like buying silence. Penelope considered this. You're right. Mrs. Grayson might know where the ledger is kept, or at the very least she might have seen or heard things that could help us. Even if she has, Victor pointed out, why would she help us? If Lancaster's paying for her silence, she has no reason to talk to us. Unless we can offer her something better, Penelope suggested. Not money, but protection. If Lancaster is arrested, she might fear retaliation from his associates. We could offer her a way out, perhaps passage to somewhere far from Idaho Territory. Victor nodded slowly. It's worth considering, but first we need to find her. If she's headed to boys, she'll take the stagecoach, Nathan finished for him. There's one that leaves Shoshone City for boys every Thursday morning. That's tomorrow, Martha noted. Victor's expression became decisive. Then we need to intercept that stagecoach. If we leave at first light, taking the Ridge Trail, we can reach Carter's Junction by mid-morning. The stagecoach stops there for a driver change and to water the horses. The plan was set. They would leave at dawn, with Nathan and Martha remaining at the cabin while Victor and Penelope rode to Carter's Junction to intercept Mrs. Grayson. If they were successful in persuading her to help them, they would proceed directly to Eagle Rock to meet Marshal Harker. If not, they would return to the cabin to reconsider their options. That evening, as Martha prepared dinner and Nathan rested, Victor took Penelope for a short walk outside. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean, the surrounding forest vibrant with renewed life. "There's something I need to say," Victor began as they walked side by side along the edge of the clearing. "About last night." Penelope's heart skipped a beat. Did he regret their kiss? Had she misinterpreted his feelings? "I meant what I said and what I didn't say," Victor continued, his voice gentle but serious. "My feelings for you are real, Penelope, but I also know that we're in an unusual situation. Danger and proximity can create connections that might not endure in calmer times." Penelope stopped walking and turned to face him. "Are you suggesting that what I feel for you, what we feel for each other, is merely a response to our circumstances?" Victor met her gaze directly. "I'm saying it could be, and that I care too much about you to rush into something that either of us might regret later." Penelope considered his words. There was wisdom in them, she had to admit, yet her heart rebelled against the suggestion that her feelings were merely situational. "I understand your concern," she said carefully, "but I also know my own mind and heart, Victor. What I feel for you isn't simply gratitude or the heightened emotions of danger. It's deeper than that." Victor's expression softened. "I want to believe that, very much." "Then believe it," Penelope said simply. "I do." Victor reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "When this is over," he said, "when Lancaster and his associates have been brought to justice and we're both safe, that's when we'll know for certain." Penelope squeezed his hand. "When this is over," she agreed. "But know this, Victor Adler, my feelings won't change. Of that I'm certain." The look Victor gave her was filled with such tenderness that it took her breath away. "You are a remarkable woman, Penelope Michaels," he said softly, before bending to kiss her once more, a kiss that held both promise and restraint, acknowledging the feelings between them while respecting the complications of their situation. They left at dawn as planned, after a hearty breakfast and lengthy farewells. Nathan extracted a promise from Victor to bring my future sister-in-law back safely, causing both Victor and Penelope to blush, while Martha merely smiled knowingly. The Ridge Trail was as challenging as Victor had warned, a narrow path that wound along the spine of a steep ridge, offering breathtaking views but requiring careful navigation. Penelope, despite her limited experience with mountain riding, handled the difficult terrain admirably, earning appreciative glances from Victor. By mid-morning, they had descended from the highlands and were approaching Carter's Junction, little more than a way station, a small general store, and a saloon that served travelers on the Boys Road. "The stage should arrive within the hour," Victor said as they dismounted in front of the way station. "We'll water the horses and get something to eat while we wait." The way station was operated by a grizzled older man named Jeb Carter, who greeted Victor as an old friend. "Victor Adler. Ain't seen you in these parts in an age. What brings you out this way?" "Just escorting the lady to meet the boys' stage," Victor replied easily, introducing Penelope as a friend visiting from back east. Jeb provided them with coffee and surprisingly good biscuits, along with the latest local news, most of which concerned the search for that missing schoolteacher from Shoshone City. They're saying she's touched in the head, Jeb told them, unaware of Penelope's true identity. Wandered off, got herself lost. Bank presidents offered a reward for information. Is that so? Victor asked casually. Generous of him, Jeb snorted. Lancaster's never been generous without reason. My guess is that schoolteacher saw or heard something she shouldn't have. Lancaster and that deputy of his, Sims, they've been thick as thieves lately, and not in a good way. Penelope and Victor exchanged a glance at this confirmation that others had noticed the relationship between Lancaster and Sims. Any other news? Victor asked, guiding the conversation away from potentially dangerous territory. Well, there's talk of the railroad extending a spur line to Shoshone City, Jeb began, happy to share his extensive knowledge of local affairs. They passed the time this way, until the sound of approaching horses announced the stagecoach's arrival. Victor and Penelope positioned themselves near the watering trough, where they could observe the passengers disembarking without being too conspicuous. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The driver called for a 30-minute rest while the horses were watered and the team changed. Passengers began to descend, a salesman type with a case of samples, a young couple clearly newlyweds, an elderly gentleman, and finally, Mrs. Grayson. The housekeeper looked different out of her working clothes, dressed in a respectable traveling suit with a small hat perched on her iron gray hair. She carried a valise and moved with the purposeful stride of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and why. Let me approach her first, Penelope murmured to Victor. She might be less intimidated by another woman. Victor nodded, though he looked concerned. I'll be right here if you need me. Penelope waited until Mrs. Grayson had moved away from the other passengers, heading toward the small general store before approaching her. Mrs. Grayson, she called softly. The housekeeper turned, her expression changing from annoyed impatience to shock and fear in an instant. You, she gasped. But how? I'm more resilient than Mr. Lancaster anticipated, Penelope said calmly, though her heart was racing. Please, I just want to talk to you. Mrs. Grayson's gaze darted around, looking for escape or perhaps assistance. I have nothing to say to you, she said tightly. And if you're wise, you'll get as far from Idaho Territory as possible, Miss Michaels. Is that what you're doing? Penelope asked. Running away before Lancaster's crimes catch up to him. The housekeeper's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Penelope said quietly. I think you've known for some time what kind of man employs you, what he's involved in, the people he's harmed, and now you're leaving before it all comes crashing down. Mrs. Grayson's lips thinned. You understand nothing. Then help me understand, Penelope urged. Lancaster and his associates will be brought to justice. A federal marshal is already on his way to Shoshone City. When he arrives, you could be seen as either an accomplice or a witness. Which would you prefer? Fear flickered in Mrs. Grayson's eyes. You're bluffing. She's not, Victor said, stepping forward to join them. Marshal James Harker should be in Shoshone City by tomorrow, Mrs. Grayson. We're offering you a chance to be on the right side of what's coming. Mrs. Grayson looked between them, clearly calculating her options. What do you want from me? Information, Penelope said. About Lancaster's ledger, the small red book he keeps his records in. Where is it now? The housekeeper hesitated, then sighed heavily. In the bank vault. After you escaped, he was in a fury. He took the book to the bank the next morning, said it would be safer there. Can you access the vault? Victor asked. Mrs. Grayson shook her head. Only Lancaster and his head clerk, Mr. Parsons, have the combination. This was a setback, but not entirely unexpected. Penelope pressed on. What else can you tell us about Lancaster's operation? His connection to the Blackwell gang. For a moment, Penelope thought Mrs. Grayson would refuse to answer. Then something seemed to break in the older woman's demeanor. "Robert Blackwell is Lancaster's cousin," she said quietly. "I overheard them once, talking about their grandmother's farm in Missouri. Lancaster provides information about valuable shipments. Blackwell's gang does the robberies, and they split the proceeds." Victor and Penelope exchanged a surprised look at this revelation. A family connection explained much about the relationship between the banker and the outlaw. "What about Deputy Sims?" Victor asked. "Sims makes sure the sheriff looks the other way," Mrs. Grayson said with distaste. "He's a greedy man, that one, not content with his share, always wanting more." The stage coach driver called for passengers to reboard. Mrs. Grayson looked anxiously toward the coach, then back at Penelope and Victor. "I need to go," she said urgently. "If Lancaster discovers I've spoken to you—" "Come with us," Penelope suggested impulsively. "Help us bring him to justice." Mrs. Grayson shook her head firmly. "I've told you what I know. The rest is up to you. I'm going to my sisters in Boise and then as far east as my savings will take me." Her expression softened slightly. "I hope you succeed, Miss Michaels. Lancaster has hurt a lot of people, but I can't help you any more." With that, she hurried to the stage coach, climbing aboard without looking back. Minutes later, the coach departed in another cloud of dust, leaving Penelope and Victor to consider what they had learned. "A family connection," Victor mused as they rode away from Carter's Junction, heading not back to the cabin but toward Eagle Rock, where they hoped to intercept Marshall Harker. "That explains a lot." "It does," Penelope agreed, "but it doesn't help us get access to the ledger." Victor was thoughtful. "Maybe we don't need the actual ledger. You memorized several entries, and Mrs. Grayson's testimony about the family connection between Lancaster and Blackwell would be damning, combined with Nathan's observation about the watch fob." "It might be enough," Penelope finished for him, "at least to prompt a thorough investigation." They rode steadily through the afternoon, making good time on the well-traveled road to Eagle Rock. As the sun began to set, Victor suggested they stop at a small roadside inn he knew to be clean and respectable. "We both need rest," he pointed out when Penelope hesitated, "and pushing on through the night would only exhaust the horses." The inn was indeed clean, if simple. Victor arranged for 2 rooms, ensuring that Penelope's was next to his own, and ordered a hot meal brought to them in the small private dining room. As they ate, they continued to discuss their plans for meeting Marshall Harker and presenting their evidence against Lancaster. Despite the seriousness of their conversation, Penelope was acutely aware of Victor's presence across the table, the way the lamplight caught the angles of his face, the strength in his hands as he cut his meat, the warmth in his eyes when they met hers. "What will you do when this is over?" she asked during a lull in their planning. "Return to your ranch and your normal life." Victor considered the question. "I suppose so," he said, though there was an uncertainty in his tone that caught Penelope's attention. "The triple-A has been my responsibility since my father died. It's a good life, if sometimes a lonely one. You have Nathan," Penelope pointed out, "and Martha and your men." "Yes," Victor agreed with a small smile, "but it's not quite the same as—" He trailed off, looking at her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "As having someone to share your life with," Penelope finished softly. Victor nodded. "What about you? Will you return to teaching in Shoshone City?" Penelope hadn't given much thought to her future beyond bringing Lancaster to justice. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I came west for a fresh start, but after everything that's happened—" "You could teach elsewhere," Victor suggested. "Eagle Rock has a school, or boys." "I could," Penelope agreed. She hesitated, then added, "though I've found I rather like ranch life. The space, the freedom, the connection to the land. Victor's eyes lit with something that looked like hope. Have you indeed? Their gazes held, the unspoken possibility hanging between them. Then Victor cleared his throat and glanced away, as if reminding himself of his own advice about waiting until their ordeal was over before making any declarations or decisions. We should rest, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Tomorrow will be a long day. They retired to their respective rooms, though Penelope found sleep elusive despite her physical exhaustion. Her mind kept returning to Victor, to the way he looked at her, to the future they might have if they survived their confrontation with Lancaster. She was still awake when a soft knock came at her door. Wrapping herself in the quilt from the bed, she opened it to find Victor standing there, fully dressed and looking troubled. "I couldn't sleep," he said by way of explanation, "and I thought I heard. It doesn't matter. I wanted to make sure you were all right." Penelope stepped back to allow him to enter. "I'm fine. Just thinking too much, I suppose." Victor remained near the door, maintaining a respectful distance despite the intimacy of the situation. "About tomorrow, about many things," Penelope admitted. "Tomorrow, yes, but also after." Victor's expression softened. "I've been thinking about after as well." "Have you?" Penelope asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "Penelope, I know I said we should wait until this is over, until we're both safe and the danger has passed. But the truth is, I don't want to wait to tell you how I feel." Penelope's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "How do you feel, Victor?" "Like I've known you all my life," he said simply. "Like finding you on that road wasn't chance but destiny." "I know it sounds foolish." "It doesn't," Penelope interrupted, moving closer to him. "Not to me." Victor reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "I love you, Penelope Michaels." "If that's too soon or too much, it's not," Penelope assured him, her own hand covering his. "I love you too, Victor. I think I have since you said you believed me when no one else would." The kiss that followed was different from their earlier ones, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. Victor's arms encircled her, drawing her closer as she responded with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both breathless, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he said softly, "I want you to stay, not as a guest, not temporarily, but permanently, if that's something you might want." "It's exactly what I want," Penelope assured him. "A life with you at the AAA." Victor's smile was radiant. "Then that's what we'll work toward. A future together." He kissed her once more, tenderly, before reluctantly pulling away. "I should go," he said, though his expression suggested he'd much rather stay. "We both need rest for tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Penelope agreed, "and then the rest of our lives." After Victor left, Penelope found sleep came more easily. Her dreams filled not with danger and conspiracy, but with visions of a future at the AAA ranch with the man she had come to love in such a short, intense time. They reached Eagle Rock by mid-afternoon the next day. The town was larger than Shoshone City, busier and more prosperous, with the railroad connection bringing a steady flow of people and goods. Victor led them directly to the telegraph office, where he hoped to find news of Marshal Harker. The clerk, a young man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up as they entered. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for information about a telegram sent to Marshal James Harker in Boise," Victor explained. "It would have been sent 2 days ago by one of my ranch hands, Billy Carlson." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "I remember that telegram. Urgent," the young man said. "I sent it right away." "Was there a reply?" Victor asked eagerly. The clerk nodded, reaching into a cubbyhole behind him. "Came in this morning. I was holding it for your man when he returned." He handed Victor a yellow telegram form. Victor read it quickly, his expression brightening. "Harker received our message. He's already on his way to Shoshone City, should arrive by tomorrow morning. He looked up at Penelope, his eyes alight with triumph. We've done it. Help is coming. The news energized them both. They decided to stay in Eagle Rock overnight, then ride to Shoshone City in the morning to meet Marshall Harker and provide the additional evidence they had gathered from Mrs. Grayson. They secured rooms at the town's best hotel, Victor insisting that after their ordeal, they deserved a comfortable night's rest. The hotel boasted not only clean, well-appointed rooms, but also a respectable dining room where they could eat without drawing undue attention. Dressed in fresh clothes purchased from a local shop, Victor had insisted on buying Penelope a new dress to replace the travel-worn garments she had been wearing. They enjoyed their first relaxed meal since the beginning of their ordeal. "You look beautiful," Victor said as they waited for their food, his eyes warm with appreciation. The dress, a simple but elegant affair in deep blue, suited Penelope's coloring and brought out the blue in her eyes. Penelope smiled, feeling almost shy under his admiring gaze. "Thank you. It feels strange to be dressed properly again, after days in borrowed clothes and on horseback." "You looked just as beautiful then," Victor assured her. Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of a young man in a deputy marshal's uniform, who approached their table with purpose. "Mr. Adler?" he inquired, looking at Victor. When Victor nodded, the deputy continued, "I'm Deputy Marshal Williams. Marshal Harker sent me ahead to Eagle Rock when he received your telegram. He thought you might come here." Victor gestured for the deputy to join them. "Have you come from Shoshone City?" "What news?" Williams took a seat, declining Victor's offer of food or drink. "Marshal Harker arrived in Shoshone City this morning earlier than expected. He went straight to the bank to speak with Lancaster." Penelope leaned forward, eager for news. "And?" Williams's expression was grim. "Lancaster wasn't there. According to the head clerk, he left town suddenly last night, taking several valuable items from the bank vault with him." Victor's jaw tightened. "He's running." "It appears so," Williams agreed. "Marshal Harker has deputies watching all the roads and has telegraphed descriptions to neighboring towns. Lancaster won't get far." "What about Deputy Sims?" Penelope asked. "In custody," Williams replied with satisfaction. "Caught trying to withdraw all his savings from the bank. He's talking freely, hoping for leniency. Mentioned a family connection between Lancaster and the Blackwell gang." Victor and Penelope exchanged a look of relief. "That confirms what we learned from Mrs. Grayson," Victor said. Williams nodded. "Marshal Harker wants to speak with you both as soon as possible. He's particularly interested in what you saw, Miss Michaels, and in these ledger entries you memorized." They agreed to leave for Shoshone City first thing in the morning, with Deputy Williams accompanying them. The young deputy left shortly thereafter, promising to return at dawn. "It's really happening," Penelope said quietly after he had gone. "Lancaster is being brought to justice." "Thanks to you," Victor pointed out. "Your courage in coming forward and persevering even when no one would believe you." "Not no one," Penelope corrected gently. "You believed me." Victor reached across the table to take her hand. "And I always will," he promised. They departed Eagle Rock at dawn as planned, accompanied by Deputy Williams. The road to Shoshone City was busy with regular traffic, freight wagons, riders, and the occasional stagecoach. About halfway to their destination, as they were passing through a stretch of road bordered by thick forest, Williams suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the trees to their right. "I saw movement." Victor's hand moved to his revolver. "Might be nothing, deer or elk." "Maybe," Williams conceded, though he didn't look convinced. "Let's proceed with caution." They had ridden perhaps another 100 yards when a shot rang out from the forest. Williams jerked in his saddle, crying out in pain as blood blossomed on his upper arm. Ambush! Victor shouted, pulling his horse alongside Penelope's and urging both animals off the road and behind a large boulder for cover. Williams followed, grimacing with pain but managing to stay in the saddle. "Lancaster," Penelope said, her voice tight with fear as Victor helped Williams dismount. "It has to be." Victor nodded grimly, checking the deputy's wound. "Flesh wound," he reported. "Painful but not serious." He turned to Penelope. "Stay here with Williams. I'm going to circle around and try to flank whoever's shooting at us." "No," Penelope protested. "It's too dangerous. We should stay together." "We're sitting ducks here," Victor pointed out, "and help won't come in time." Before Penelope could argue further, more shots rang out, chipping stone from the boulder that sheltered them. Victor's expression hardened with resolve. "Take this," he said, handing Williams's revolver to Penelope. "Use it if you have to." With that, he was gone, slipping into the forest with a stealth that spoke of his military training. Penelope turned her attention to Williams, using her petticoat to bandage his wound while keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. "He'll be all right," Williams assured her, noticing her worried glances in the direction Victor had disappeared. "Marshal Harker says Victor Adler is one of the most capable men he knows." Penelope managed a tight smile. "Let's hope he's right." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The occasional shot still rang out, but they seemed to be directed away from their position now toward where Victor must be moving through the forest. Then came a shout, followed by the sound of a scuffle and a single gunshot that echoed through the trees. Silence fell, heavy and ominous. Penelope's heart seemed to stop. Had Victor been hit? Was he lying somewhere in the forest, wounded or worse? She was debating whether to go look for him when she heard footsteps approaching. Raising Williams's revolver with trembling hands, she prepared to defend herself and the injured deputy. "Penelope," Victor's voice called out. "It's safe now." Relief washed over her as Victor emerged from the forest, leading a second horse with a figure slumped over its saddle, a figure she recognized immediately. "Lancaster," Williams said, struggling to his feet despite his injury. Victor nodded, his expression grim. "He tried to shoot me when I found him. The bullet went wild and I managed to disarm him." He glanced at the unconscious banker. "He hit his head on a rock during our struggle. He'll live to stand trial." Penelope lowered the revolver, her hands shaking with relief. "I thought, when I heard that last shot." Victor's expression softened as he moved to her side. "I'm fine," he assured her, gently taking the weapon from her hands. "And Lancaster's days of terrorizing Shoshone City are over." With Williams's help despite his injury, Victor secured Lancaster to his horse. The banker was beginning to regain consciousness, groaning and muttering as they proceeded toward Shoshone City. When they arrived, they found Marshal Harker and his deputies already in control of the situation. Sims was in custody, as were several members of the bank staff who had been complicit in Lancaster's schemes. Most importantly, the marshal had located the red ledger in the bank vault exactly where Mrs. Grayson had said it would be. "This contains everything we need to prosecute Lancaster, Sims, and the Blackwell gang," Harker told them after examining the ledger. "Detailed records of every transaction, every robbery, every payment. Lancaster was meticulous, which will be his undoing." In the days that followed, Penelope found herself something of a local hero. The townspeople, initially skeptical of her accusations, now approached her with apologies and congratulations. The school board, embarrassed by their earlier doubts, offered her position back with a raise in salary. "You deserve it," the board chairman told her earnestly. Standing up to Lancaster the way you did that took real courage." Penelope thanked him but didn't immediately accept. "I need some time to consider my future," she explained. Her future, she knew, was inextricably linked with Victor's now. In the aftermath of Lancaster's arrest, they had spent every possible moment together, their feelings deepening with each passing day. When they weren't providing statements to Marshal Harker or helping to sort through the evidence against Lancaster and his associates, they were making plans for their shared future. A week after their return to Shoshone City, Victor took Penelope for a ride to a beautiful spot overlooking a valley not far from the Triple-A ranch. As they sat together on a fallen log, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson, Victor turned to her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart swell. "I've been thinking," he began, taking her hands in his, "about what happens next for us." Penelope smiled. "As have I. I know it's soon," Victor continued, his voice gentle but certain. "We've known each other only a short time, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He released her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small box. "Penelope Michaels, will you marry me? Will you make the Triple-A your home and make me the happiest man in Idaho Territory?" Tears of joy filled Penelope's eyes as Victor opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a small diamond set in gold. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Victor, I will marry you." The kiss that followed was a promise of love, of partnership, of a future built together. As Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, Penelope felt a certainty she had never known before. This was where she belonged. With this man in this place, building a life based on trust, courage, and love. They were married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at the Triple-A ranch. Nathan, now fully recovered from his injuries, stood as his brother's best man. Martha wept openly, declaring that Miss Sarah would be so pleased to see her brother so happy. The ranch hands cheered enthusiastically, having already accepted Penelope as part of their family. Even Marshal Harker attended, bringing news that Lancaster, Sims, and several members of the Blackwell gang had been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. "Justice served," he told them with satisfaction. "Thanks in large part to you two." As husband and wife, Victor and Penelope found in each other the perfect partner. Penelope's intelligence and education complemented Victor's practical knowledge and experience. Together, they expanded the Triple-A's operations, introducing new breeding stock and modern farming methods that Victor had been considering for years, but hadn't implemented without a supportive partner to encourage him. Penelope didn't abandon teaching entirely. With Victor's enthusiastic support, she established a small school on the ranch for the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. The school quickly gained a reputation for excellence, with students sometimes traveling considerable distances to attend. Their first child, a son they named James after Marshal Harker, was born just over a year after their marriage. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah, named for Victor's sister. Both children grew up strong and healthy, thriving in the open spaces of the ranch and under the loving guidance of their parents. As the years passed, Shoshone City grew and prospered, the dark days of Lancaster's influence fading into memory. Victor and Penelope remained respected members of the community, their story of courage and justice becoming something of a local legend. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Penelope turned to her husband with a smile. "You ever think about how we met?" she asked. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't been riding that particular stretch of road that evening." Victor took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that adjoined her engagement ring. I try not to think about what might have been, he said thoughtfully. But I do thank God every day that I found you, that I believed you when you needed someone to believe in you. As do I, Penelope said softly. That moment when I was sobbing that no one would believe me, and you said those simple words. I believe every word. That was the moment our story truly began. Victor leaned over to kiss her gently. And what a wonderful story it's been, he murmured against her lips. With many more chapters yet to come. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors as on the day Victor had proposed, Penelope rested her head on her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes, in the most unexpected circumstances and the most unlikely places, one could find not just justice, but love that would last a lifetime.